What is up, everybody? Noble Comics here with the next round of the Tournament of Power, and this is a big one. We've got Luffy from One Piece versus Kenpachi from Bleach. We're going to look at their powers, their skills, their different advantages, and finally, who would win if they met on the battlefield. But first, the results of the last match of Naruto versus Iron Man. Naruto is going to win, and he's going to move forward in the bracket. But with that out of the way, let's get into today's fight. So, Kenpachi versus Luffy. Now this is going to be a fun fight, because last time when I did Kenpachi versus Whitebeard, I got flamed in the comments by Kenpachi fans who were saying that Whitebeard is nowhere close, Kenpachi solos the entire One Piece universe, this powerful and that powerful, yada yada yada. And I would respond to these people and I would ask, based on what? Because I admitted, I'm not a big Bleach fan, so I'm saying, okay, what is leading you to that conclusion that Kenpachi is this powerful? As what's actually shown in the manga, right? And nobody ever replied except one person. I said, based on what? I don't see any evidence that Kenpachi is this much more powerful than the One Piece universe people. And he just replied and said, it's not that deep, don't worry about it. Come on, you're telling me that I'm incorrect, so I'm asking you, okay, why am I incorrect? And then you don't actually have a response to that. I think Kenpachi is just one of those characters who's he's so powerful and he beats everybody in his own universe that people just assume that he would also be the most powerful person in other universes. Because, Whitebeard in his prime, it was said to have the power to destroy the entire planet. And he was well past his prime during that fight, but he was still very powerful, so I thought that was a very odd response. But today we have another fight against a One Piece character, this time being Luffy. And again, both of these characters have limitations brought on them. For Kenpachi, like I said last time, this is post-time skip. He can take off his eye patch, but he does not have his Bankai ability or his fully realized Zanpakuto, just his normal sword. And for Luffy, we are not doing Gear 5, we're only doing up to Gear 4. So let's see, have I learned my lesson about Kenpachi or not? Let's get into the fight. And I will go ahead and just start with Kenpachi since I'm already talking about it. So like I said, I did try and do research into, again, this specific character that I outlined with the certain restraints that I put on him as to how powerful actually is this character. Was I lowballing him? And from what I can tell, his most impressive feat here would be his fight against Gremmy, right? And Gremmy could warp reality, whatever he imagined would come into existence. And Kenpachi was able to beat him. But he did do a few impressive things throughout that fight, right? We saw him tank attacks from multiple firearms and explosives all at once. We saw him survive the vacuum of space for a few seconds, though it did greatly damage him. We saw him survive this massive explosion from some of Gremmy's clones, and it's hard to scale how big that explosion is. I don't know, it's like saying a nuclear bomb. Is that accurate? I don't know, but a large explosion, though again, he was greatly weakened after the fact. And most notable, the most impressive, probably is whenever he cut this meteorite in half in one swing and he still had his eye patch on. Now, I will say he did use his Zanpakuto whenever he did this, which is not exactly right, that's outside of the rules that I outlined, but I guess it's still very impressive nonetheless, and shows just how powerful of a character Kenpachi is. And he did all that, again, with his eye patch on. If he took that off, his spiritual energy would be even greater, and he would be even more powerful. But even before this, we've seen him do, again, extremely impressive things like cutting skyscrapers in half, doing attacks that look like they level an entire city, fighting and defeating many very powerful beings, including fighting Gerard, that giant who's wicked powerful, right? Even though he couldn't beat him on his own, but he still did a pretty good fight, all things considered. And if you remember, he was trapped inside this completely dark, completely soundless room where he was being attacked, and he was fast enough to dodge attacks as soon as they touched his clothing, and was able to respond, deal damage to the other person, and avoid lethal damage to himself. Again, all while not being able to see or hear anything, which is extremely impressive. We've also seen him be able to take a ton of damage, like I said, in that fight against Gremmy with being out in outer space, being hit with that bomb. In that fight against Gerard, he's getting smacked around quite a bit. He's taken many slice and stab wounds from people like Ichigo and others, and is certainly not concerned with getting damaged. It seems he's pretty open and just rushes into the fight. He's extremely competent, but he doesn't really seem to care if he gets damaged that much. But again, from what I've been able to tell, his most impressive feat was cutting that meteorite in half, surviving in space, surviving that explosion. And directly after he took all that damage, he had sort of one of his most embarrassing feats was whenever he got his butt kicked by the Bambis, who are way, way, way less powerful than him, but in his weakened state, they were able to beat the crap out of him pretty easily. So we know that the guy at least has a limit. In fact, when he was in that weakened state, he didn't even defeat Grimmy. Grimmy kind of defeated himself, but hey, a W is a W. So now let's look at Luffy, who again we're restricting to his Gear 4 form. Let's walk through what Luffy is looking at as far as his forms, techniques, abilities. So his powers come from the fact that he has eaten this devil fruit that gives him essentially rubber skin, so he can grow and stretch and things like that. And with this ability, he has different gears, or essentially different forms that he can use, Gear 2, 3, and 4. And again, we're excluding Gear 5 here. And he also has abilities called Haki, which are sort of more akin to a technique, I guess, than a form. And he has 3 different forms of Haki. So, explaining all of this out, Gear 2, he essentially dopes blood through his body using his, rubber body, and he's able to increase his speed massively, being able to move way faster than the eye can see, even for beings who are extremely fast themselves. Gear 3 is whenever he can sort of enlarge his limbs, making his punches and kicks and everything much more powerful, as they're able to do a lot more damage. Gear 4 is where it sort of branches out a little bit. He has a few different forms, but essentially, he's doing the same thing. He's growing his body stronger, faster, but in a few different variations. For example, he has Bounce Man, where he's sort of a big rubber ball, to bounce into things and do damage. Snake Man, he sort of is coiling his skin, and it's dealing more damage that way. But all of his Gear 4 forms are enhanced with his second form of Haki, and let's get into that. So his first form of Haki is called Observation Haki. This essentially gives him precognition, so he knows he can see a glimpse to the future of incoming attacks to be able to respond to them. His second form of Haki is called Armament Haki, and he can essentially harden a point or a portion of his body to make it way stronger and way more durable. And the third form is called Conqueror's Haki, which I think, for the sake of ease, is equivalent to something like spiritual energy from Bleach. It's sort of like the more of it you have, the more powerful you are. It has effects on weaker people, like, for example, Conqueror's Haki. If you're weak of mind, it'll just knock you out. But we've seen it affect the environment as well, like when Shanks walks on Whitebeard's ship, you can see his ship like creaking and cracking and stuff just by his presence, right? The force that he gives off. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that Conqueror's Haki and that spiritual pressure probably cancel each other out. But his Observation Haki and Armament Haki will be major players in this fight. Like we saw Luffy in Gear 4 against Doflamingo, who is one of the 7 warlords, one of the upper echelon of powerful characters in One Piece. Luffy was able to rock him with a punch across the island, destroying parts of the island as he flung the guy. We saw him fight and defeat Katakuri using his Snake Man form, and he was extremely powerful as well. But of course, his most impressive feat was fighting and defeating Kaido, who was probably the strongest man on the planet. And he was able to defeat him finally in Gear 5, but even up until then in Gear 4, he was giving him a very good fight. From his base form all the way up to his mythical dragon form, we saw Luffy delivering, again, giant punches, crushing this dude. We saw him moving extremely fast, punching, dozens if not hundreds of times faster than the eye can see. And he was tanking attacks from Kaido as well. And again, Kaido has a blast breath, which is essentially, right, dragon's breath, that was like leveling, disintegrating mountains that Luffy was able to tank. He was tanking hits from his giant club, which is like island level at least hits. But Luffy was able to keep pace and again was able to wail damage on him. And Luffy also had a technique called internal Haki strikes, which is if you're using like your Armament Haki and you're hitting somebody, instead of just doing outright damage, it's like you're hitting it and then imploding them from the inside, right? Which is again just dealing way more damage. But like most One Piece fights, this was a marathon and not a sprint, right? These two were fighting for who knows how many total chapters it was. It was a long fight, and they both wail on each other enough until one of them eventually gives out, and Kaido was the one who eventually gave out. These fights are never really quick. versus something like, in Bleach, the fights can be much faster because I think there's a lot more lethality because it's a lot more blade based, right? They're using swords and stuff, so you can just cut someone in half and kill them. Versus One Piece, it's a lot more just wailing on somebody until they don't get up anymore. So, what would happen if these two fought? Well, let's see kind of how the advantages pan out here. When it comes to pure strength, we'll say like striking power, I think that while Luffy can almost certainly hit harder than Kenpachi can, with that sword, his power output goes way up. Like, I don't think Luffy could have shattered that meteorite in one punch the way that Kenpachi sliced it in half with one cut, right? So single cut to single punch, Kenpachi probably has the advantage. When it comes to durability, I think that that's kind of difficult to say, because we did see, again, Kenpachi survive the vacuum of space, saw him survive that massive explosion, and he was pretty much at his limit at that point. But we have seen him survive plenty of bullets and explosions and cuts and stuff like that in the past, getting thrashed by giants, so we know he is very durable. And on Luffy's end, we saw him be able to take, again, tons and tons of damage as well from Kaido and, again, other extremely powerful pirates from the One Piece universe. So as far as that goes, I'm not quite sure. Luffy may have an advantage just due to his physiology of being made of rubber. Maybe that gives him a slight advantage, but I'm not quite sure. When it comes to skill and experience, Kenpachi probably has more experience, and he's probably more skilled than Luffy is, because again, he's very combat intelligent, he's very smart, and he definitely is skilled, but his fighting style is a lot more reckless, I guess, when it's just punching on somebody and trying to not take damage, versus a sword fight, which I think is going to be a little bit more technical, because there's a higher lethality there, so maybe Kenpachi gets that. But I think the big one is speed. And Luffy absolutely dominates speed, right? We know that Luffy, in just regular gear too, is probably faster than Kenpachi. We don't see a ton of speed feats from Kenpachi. Again, we saw him be able to react to that sword slice before it could hit him, and that was very early on, so we have to imagine that he's much faster than that now. But we've just seen so much from Luffy, again, moving incredibly fast, faster than the eye can see, even for extremely, extremely fast characters. We've seen him dodge light speed attacks before from Kizaru, or from the pacifistas, excuse me. And on top of all that, he does have observation haki, so even if he did have a speed disadvantage, he can still glimpse the future and have precognition that would at least put him on par, but he's even faster than Kenpachi. So I think when it comes to speed, Luffy is very far ahead, and I think Kenpachi will have a very hard time landing a hit. I do think that Kenpachi, again, has a lethality advantage. If he can cut Luffy in half, then that's potentially the end of it. But that's the hard part, is being able to cut him in half. And then there's the whole topic of the armament haki. It's like, could Kenpachi cut through his armament haki? I'm not sure. We've never seen anybody cut it before, so it's like, is that even possible? I don't know. So again, I think if this particular version of Kenpachi goes up against this particular version of Luffy, I think that Luffy probably has the overall advantage, because even where Kenpachi has an advantage, I don't think it's to such a great degree. Like Luffy in Gear 4 wailing on Kenpachi with these rapid high-speed internal hockey strike punches. Like, I don't see him surviving that long. Or at least I don't see him surviving long enough to deliver a lethal blow to Luffy, who again is so much faster. I mean, if Luffy hits Kenpachi with that Gear 4 elephant gun, that dude is going to be feeling it, you know what I mean? Let's not pretend that he's such a higher tier, untouchable character by these people, because there's nothing that's been shown to validate that opinion. I do certainly think there's a world where Kenpachi does win, right? If he can get, again, that killing blow against Luffy, cuts his head off, cuts him in half, something like that, that could be the end of it, and maybe, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 times, that's what happens. But majority of the time, I do see Luffy winning it. I think that he definitely has the speed advantage. I think that while he may not have the power advantage outright, he still is extremely powerful and extremely strong, and he's going to be landing way more hits on Kenpachi than Kenpachi is going to land on him. Again, especially because Kenpachi doesn't even try to have a defense most of the time. And you add on armament haki, and you add on observation haki, I don't really see a realistic world where Kenpachi is winning this a majority of the time. I just don't think his stats match up. And if you disagree, please outline for me how Kenpachi wins. Cite me some sources of how Kenpachi can win this, again, with the version that I picked. And if you do disagree, the good news is that this is all up to you. You guys can go vote in the communities tab for whoever you want to win. They will move forward to the next bracket. But let me know what you guys thought of the video. Let me know who you think would win, Luffy or Kenpachi. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.